1896, after 18 years with a conservative government, the Liberals won, and Laurier became the first Francophone Prime Minister of Canada. During his second term in 1903, Laurier revealed the decision to construct a second transcontinental railway, with the Grand Trunk Pacific constructing a line from Winnipeg westward to Prince Rupert, BC. In 1905, the Laurier government introduced the Autonomy Bills into the House of Commons. The bills called for a creation of two new provinces, Saskatchewan and Alberta. The real crisis, the Manitoba school question, the Boer War, the construction of a Canadian Navy, and the proposed reciprocity treaty with the United States were all issues that provoked emotional debates between French Canadians and English Canadians. French Canadians were fighting to preserve their culture outside Quebec and opposed any rapprochement with England. English Canadians were fighting to confine Francophones to Quebec and supported any move towards closer ties with England. For more than 15 years, Laurier's policy of compromise earned him the nickname of the Great Consolidator and kept him at the head of the country. In 1910 to 11, he passed two more unpopular bills: the Naval Service Bill establishing a Canadian Navy and the Reciprocity Bill, providing free trade and reduced duty on several natural resources to the United States. This sealed his political defeat as Prime Minister, and Wilfrid Laurier became leader of the opposition. Reciprocity became a major issue in the federal election of 1911. Laurier's Liberals were thrashed in the election. Robert Borden's Conservatives won 134 seats, winning the majority government. The Laurier era was over, and Borden and his Conservative Party now faced the challenges of guiding Canada through the difficulties that lay ahead. When Britain declared war on Germany on the 4th of August 1914, Canada and other members of the British Empire were automatically involved. Under Robert Borden's leadership, Canada contributed greatly to the Allied war effort during the First World War. The sacrifice of Canada's soldiers enabled the Borden government to gain a new autonomy for the country during the war and the Versailles peace talks which followed. However, in 1917, the issue of conscription seriously divided both the national political parties in the country. In the beginning of the war, many Canadians were eager to enlist to fight overseas. Many soldiers and most of the 22nd Regiment fought valiantly, and most of them died in the trenches. By 1916, the flow of volunteers were drying up, and casualties were mounting overseas. Borden and the Conservatives decided that there was a need to conscript soldiers. His government passed the Military Service Act, which drafted single men between the ages of 20 and 35. Robert Borden invited Laurier and the Liberals to join with the Conservatives to create a union government committed to winning this war. Laurier opposed conscription and refused the invitation. However, Borden was able to persuade many English-speaking Liberals to join him. In the 1917 election, Borden passed the Wartime Elections Act, granting mothers, daughters, and wives of soldiers to vote in federal elections in an effort to win votes. The Union government won 153 seats. The Liberals won 82 seats. In the end, the conscription policy raised about 12,000 conscripts. The war ended before most of them faced combat. In the federal election of 1925, Prime Minister King and the Liberals won fewer seats than the Conservatives. Mackenzie King was Prime Minister of Canada on and off for a total of 22 years. A compromiser and a conciliator, Mackenzie King was mild-mannered and had a bland public personality. In 1920, the United Farm Groups of Ontario and Ireland formed a national political party, the Progressive Party. Support from discontented farmers and labor groups led to a strong progressive showing in the 1921 federal election. To stay in power, the Liberal minority government, the first federal minority government ever elected in Canada, had to keep the support of the progressive members. King introduced a number of progressive measures into Parliament, including old age pensions and a reduction of tariffs on farm machinery. King still had the support of the progressives and refused to resign. By 1926, however, it was clear that King was losing support, mostly because of a corruption scandal in the customs department. Without the progressives, King feared he might face a defeat in a vote of Parliament. Because such a vote could take place, King went to the Governor-General and asked him to dissolve Parliament so there could be a new election. The Governor-General of Canada, the Lord Byng of Denny, refused the request from his Prime Minister. Lord Byng believed that King should have resigned when the Conservatives won more seats than the Liberals. King resigned. The Governor-General asked the Conservatives, under Arthur Meighen, to form a government. Meighen formed a government, but soon lost the vote in the House of Commons. As a result, he was forced to ask Byng to dissolve Parliament. Byng did so and called another election. In the 1926 election campaign, Prime Minister King claimed that the Governor-General had acted unconstitutionally in denying King's request to call an election but granting Labour. The Liberals won more seats than the Conservatives, allowing King to stay in power for 4 more years with the support of progressive-minded MPs. By defeating William King in the 1930 election, Richard Bedford Bennett had the misfortune of taking office during the Great Depression. Bennett tried to combat the Depression by increasing trade within the British Empire and imposing tariffs for imports from outside the Empire, promising that his measures would blast Canadian exports into world markets. His success was limited, however, and his own wealth and impersonal style alienated many struggling Canadians. In 1931, the Bennett government passed 2 relief acts that directed federal money to municipalities on condition that the municipality and the province provided matching funds. In 1934, Bennett hoped to establish some financial stability, and he created the Bank of Canada to regulate currency and credit. The next year, Bennett proposed even more radical steps. He offered Canadians a New Deal. As the country moved towards a federal election in 1935, the government proposed a set of reforms, including unemployment insurance, a minimum wage law, and a shortened workweek. Despite the dramatic nature of these steps, Canadian electors voted Bennett and the Conservatives out of office in the 1935 election, bringing King back to power. The Liberals won 173 seats and the Conservatives 40. King realized the likelihood of World War II before Hitler invaded Poland in 1939 and began mobilizing on August 25, 1939, with full mobilization in September. Unlike World War I, however, when Canada was automatically at war as soon as Britain joined, King asserted Canadian autonomy by waiting until September 10th, a full week after Britain's declaration, when the vote in the House of Commons took place, to support the government's decision to declare war. Canada contributed food supplies, financial aid, the British Commonwealth air training plans, ships, aircraft, tanks, and over 1 million Canadian troops to the Allied cause. The close friend of King was British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and U.S. President F.D. Roosevelt was one of the cornerstones of the Allied effort. He enacted conscription for defensive activities and homeland security for students and volunteers to fight in Europe until the last year of the war. This was politically divisive as the French-speaking people of Quebec did not want to fight in Europe, while the English-speaking population of other provinces wanted to enact war plans to support the soldiers already in Europe. In the end, he managed to compromise and only send a few thousand soldiers to Europe who had not volunteered to fight for him, and then mostly in support roles and not fight for him. He managed to keep Canada unified throughout the war and the Great Depression. In the conscription crisis of 1944, St. Lawrence staunched the fort, prevented the collapse of the government and the war effort. In the immediate aftermath of victory, he became involved in the establishment of the United Nations. Not only did he see a role for Canada's independence of Britain and the Commonwealth, he felt that as a middle power, Canada should take an active role as an intermediary in international affairs. By 1948, St. Lawrence's political retirement was long overdue and he contemplated resigning. However, King and the Liberal Party felt that there was no man better qualified to succeed as Prime Minister. St. Lawrence was persuaded to stand as a candidate in the Leadership Convention in August 1948, which he won. In his first election as Prime Minister, the party was worried about his public image. While his quiet, reserved, and dignified manner enhanced the House of Commons, would they appeal to the average Canadian? But St. Lawrence surprised everyone with his common touch and ability to connect with people. His rapport with children proved particularly appealing, and he was dubbed Uncle Louis. As Prime Minister, St. Lawrence oversaw the joining of Newfoundland in Confederation as Canada's 10th province in 1949. Despite considerable initial opposition, he managed to establish equalization payments to the provinces. The Liberals continued their program of social reform with improvements in pensions and health insurance. Canada played an important role in resolving the Suez Crisis in 1966 and contributed to the UN force in the Korean War. Under St. Lawrence's ministry, wartime debts were paid off and Canada enjoyed a